Thank you for watching this online class presentation from Cedarville University. Cedarville offers students a full calendar of events to enjoy, including alt nights, campus Christmas concerts, and more. There is always something to do at Cedarville. We invite you to learn more at cedarville.edu.
All right, so the last time we got together, we were talking through the image of God and thinking through in that doctrine of humanity what it means to be made in God's image. So thinking again here of the idea that God made us, He made us male and female, He made us to work, and He made us for community. Embedded in all of that is that God made us as His image bearers. Now, the key text here on this is in Genesis 1. Again, just to review this, Genesis 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." And going back to, by the way, Trinitarian theology, I think here God is not talking to angels. He's talking to Himself as Father and Son and Spirit. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps in the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female He created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful, and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing that moves on the earth." So that's the key passage referring to what it means to be made in God's image after His likeness. And we'll talk more today about what it means to operate in this way and saying, okay, what does it actually mean that we're made in God's image? What does that actually require of us, ask of us in this life? And don't forget, I showed this last time just to think through all of this. I mean, being made in the image of God, at the very least, what we know is that this is a call to represent God. So representation is a key facet of being an image bearer of God. So, like I said last time, this picture of me is a representation of me. I would say it's a good representation. It's a good image. You'd look at that and say, that right there is Jeremy Kimball. I can see that in that way. Now, I also showed last time this idea of my children coloring this picture from this book a few years back, and I would say that's not a helpful or accurate, I don't think anyway, representation of me and who I am, what I look like. The idea here, though, being that first one would say God made us in His image. But because of Genesis 3, and we're going to talk a lot about this in the doctrine of sin, because of the fall and sin, that image within us is marred and distorted. It's there, but it's totally distorted by sin and needs to be renewed in knowledge after the image of our Creator, Colossians 3 verse 10 says, and that happens by means of salvation as well as sanctification by means of the Holy Spirit. So that's we discussed last time in many ways. Now going forward here, let's find my spot really quick. Going forward on this idea of what it means to be made in God's image, there are some historical views. So you see here the functional view, the relational view, and the substantive view. Because again, there's about 5 passages in the Bible that talk about being made in God's image and not a lot of detail attached to them. We want to ask the question, well again, what does it mean to be made in His image and how do we operate as image bearers? And historically, a lot has been said about this in a variety of ways. And so we want to think through these 3 views today. This is our goal. These 3 views here to think through what is a functional view, what is a relational view, what is a substantive view of the image of God, and then to ask the question, okay, which one is correct? And then end up with some practical application for us in terms of being made in God's image. So, first here, the functional view. This view says the image of God is something that humans do. It's some function only humans perform. Most often, the function mentioned is that of exercising dominion or subduing the creation. So Genesis 1:28 is seen as the explanation of 27, in that the image of God is a verb. It's something that we do. Again, to go back to this passage in Genesis 1, right? We see in verse 27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves in the earth. So in this view, what's being said is, okay, verse 27 says God made humanity in his image. And then in verse 28, you have a job to do. Have dominion and subdue creation. So in this view, they would say image-bearing means functioning as God's vice ruler on planet Earth to subdue and have dominion over the earth. That's what you do. Doing that is image-bearing. That's the idea. Also with this, many theologians use this kind of terminology of prophet and priest and king. This is used of Jesus, if you recall this. He is the greatest prophet, the greatest priest, the greatest king. And here we're saying that even humanity, ourselves in the garden, you could say that Adam and Eve have this priestly role in Genesis 2:15, where it says there that they are to work and keep the Garden of Eden. Right? Which says, again, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Now in Numbers 3, Numbers 8, and Numbers 18, those three places, those two words, work and keep, are used to describe the work of priests in the tabernacle. So it seems that Moses is trying to highlight there's a priestly function of humanity in the garden. There's a kingly function to subdue, to have dominion over in that way as well. And there's also a prophetic function in terms of Adam naming the animals, Adam naming Eve. Adam, we would presume, at least not there overtly, but presume Adam would speak to Eve the command of God to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because she knows that in Genesis 3. She's not there yet in Genesis 2 when God proclaims it to Adam, so we'd say he's proclaiming that with authority there as well. So functioning. What they do is the image bearing of God. That's one view. That's the functional view. Secondly, would be the relational view. This view focuses on the importance of relationships for humanity, thus the name, obviously. So this view looks back to the central verses on the image of God. Again, Genesis 1, 26 to 28, and sees the explanation of the meaning of the image of God within those verses. So note this, in verse 26, God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And people say here, you can denote from that relationship within the triune Godhead, Father and Son and Spirit, saying, hey, let's make humanity in this kind of a way. And so it hints at the fact of relationship within the nature of God himself. So in a corresponding manner, God doesn't create a single isolated creature, but a man and a woman. Right? The two exist in relationship with one another, and it's that relationship which reflects the relationship within the Godhead and the relationship of man with God that is the image of God. So put it in a nutshell really quick here. We say the image of God is humanity's relational capacities. God is relational. We can relate to one another, right? As siblings, parent-children, friends, various relationships going on. And we can relate to God in a unique way that nothing else on planet Earth could. Like we can relate to God in a unique, profound way. So that image-bearing idea is, again, horizontal relationships and the fact that we can relate to God in some way as well because he is a relational God. So functional, what you do, subdue and have dominion. Relational, we can relate to others and to God as well. That's another view. Then finally, this other view, the substantive view. The substantive view. This is, it's, again, what it sounds like, that there is some kind of substance or capacity or qualities within us that we possess that are shared by God. So again, it's capacities that we possess that are in some way likened to God and who he is. These would be, to be simple here, these would be intellect, that God has intellect and we can think as well, emotions, and a will or a volition, right? So we have these capacities to reason, intellect, capacities to feel and have affections, emotion, and then to will and to do what God is calling us to in that way as well. So those are ways that we're superior and different from the rest of creation in that way as well. We represent God in that we can do, to some degree, in some measure, we're finite obviously, what He can do because He's granted us capacities to operate in those ways. So God made us, this is key, God made us to know Him, obey Him, and love Him, and therefore the image of God includes those capacities necessary to do those things, namely to know Him and obey Him and love Him. Intellect, emotions, and will, right? Intelligence or reason to know God, conscience and will to obey God, and then emotions and affections to love God. So there are your three views, right? The functional view, the relational view, and the substantive view. And the question throughout history has been, okay, which one is correct? How do I know which one is the right thing to say in terms of that's what it means to be an image bearer of God? Good question. So you have read Sam Storm's article for today on the image of God. And so you know his view. He advocates what's called an eclectic or a holistic view. And I agree with this. I think there's a way in which all three of these, the substantive, relational, functional views, can come together to say something about the image of God within us that is biblically true. So I think those three come together in profound ways. I'll say more on that in just a second here. But just to remind, before we go on here to that, just to back up and say again how we're getting toward these ideas of image bearing and how it all fits together. Images, again, don't forget, images are simply statues or pictures that represented someone, often a king or a god. During the Second Gulf War in Iraq, and that time frame when Saddam Hussein was taken out of his regime there, after he was taken out, it was amazing. People, as they scoured the land in various places, it was amazing. They found thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of statues and busts and pictures and portraits of Saddam Hussein. Images of this guy everywhere, all over the country. It was as if Saddam Hussein was trying to say, look, I'm not everywhere at once. I'm in one place here in this country, but don't forget my power, my influence, my dictatorship reigns over this entire country. When you see this statue, this bust, this picture, this portrait, don't forget, I am in charge. All those images would remind the people of that country, this guy's in charge, do not cross him, that'll go badly for you. Reminds them that he's there doing these things. Well, that's what images do. They remind us of that particular person and say to us again and again, okay, here's what it means to live around this person in their midst and to even in some ways see them as a representation of that person as well. So images do that. We are God's image. We are, if you will, walking billboards of His might and His authority, made to justly rule over creation, rightly steward the earth, and glorify Him in all things. And so that's the idea we see there. We're walking billboards of God's might and God's rule and God's authority. I mean, I think it's simple ideas here, right? When I was in middle school, I don't know if it's still popular today, I don't know, I have no idea, but in my days in middle school, it was unbelievably popular to wear the jersey of professional basketball players. Man, oh man, like all the time you saw us in school, guys especially wearing just jerseys of their favorite player. I had a Charlotte Hornets Alonzo Mourning jersey back in the day. I recall that. Great player back in the 90s especially. Played with the Hornets and the Heat as well. And people wear like a LeBron James jersey nowadays or Steph Curry, whoever else. And it's a way of trying to say, hey, this jersey is trying to remind you, like, think of that player. Think of how he plays and what he does and how great and how superior he is to all other players, right? All sorts of things that we do to remind ourselves of this. I recall, it was a interesting thing here with this class. I had a group of you guys over at my house actually for dinner not long ago, and someone had 3D printed a bust of Dr. White, about that big, and brought it to my house. And they put up my bookshelf. And I came to my living room at one moment that night, and I saw that there, and I thought, why is this in my house? But it was interesting to note, man, it immediately brought to mind for me my relationship to Dr. White, what I know of him, who he is, all these things. And this is what images do. So we are meant to point people to God. That's why he exists. That's why I exist, to bring attention toward and affection toward God. We are not just meant to say, look at me, look at me, look at me. We are meant to spotlight the greatness and goodness and gloriousness of God. That's why we are imaging him. Jesus is that true image of God, and we're to be renewed in that image from one degree of glory to another, 2 Corinthians 3:18 says. And that's the idea we see there. Now, with that, let's get back to this point of these three views. So images exist to represent and point people toward the reality, namely here, God. I would say this: the functions and relationality mentioned are conceivable due to the fact that God created us with intelligence, with conscience and will, and with emotion. So say this again. The reason why you have certain functions you're called toward and relationship you're called toward, that you can do those things, is God made you with certain capacities to know and to feel and to do. So I would say that the substantive view is central. The idea here being that we are made, God made us as image bearers with capacities to know and to feel and to do, so that we can function in certain ways, to have dominion and subdue the earth as he's called us to as good stewards, and to relate to others and to love them as we love ourselves, and to love God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, all of our strength. So I think in the center of all this, image bearing means we are representatives of God, right? We are sons of God. That's also connected here as well. The idea there being like we are representing God on this planet with capacities to do and operate in certain ways for God's glory. That's the idea I think we have going on there. We're made by God with certain capacities to relate to God and function as God has called us to. That's the idea we see here. So I would say all three matter, and central to all three is the substantive view of those capacities God has given to us in those ways. So, passages that teach about it, we're going to be careful to know what those are, and then also to think through theologically, what does it mean for us to operate in ways that please him and image him appropriately. So much of this, just to go back really quick, so much of this is bent on being renewed in knowledge. As Ephesians 4:22 says, the idea here being that we are sinful by nature and need to be saved and sanctified in newness. So verse 22, I'll start at verse 21. Assuming you've heard about Christ and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, created after the likeness, Genesis 1 language, of God, in true righteousness and holiness. Listen, you can talk all day about functioning, in ways that I steward this world by being an engineer and patenting things that will better our world, or being a pharmacist and getting things from medicine that will make our world better. Great, awesome, yes. But the primary way in which we function, the way God wants us to, is by being a people who are being renewed in the likeness of God in holiness and righteousness. We can do a lot of great things in the world's eyes, even in God's eyes, but we're called to do them as we renew this image within us and do this in a Christian fashion in our character. That's a key thing to keep in mind. So some application here, think through for this idea of being made in God's image. I want to really try to focus on a few of these because these really, really matter in terms of thinking through the way in which this comes for our lives in practical ways. Being made in the image of God underscores human distinctiveness. The foundational verses in Genesis 1 stand out, and they do so by design, in distinction to the animals and universe that were created by God's command. Humans were created with special consideration and in God's likeness and image. You guys noted this in Genesis 1. If you have Bible still, you can turn there, Genesis 1. Just note, you know the rhythm. There's evening, there is morning, day 1. There's evening and morning, day 2. There's evening and morning, day 3, etc., etc., etc. So all the way through this, Genesis 1, verses 3 to 5, cover day 1. 6 to 8 cover day 2. 9 through 13 cover day 3. 14 to 19 cover day 4. 20 through 23 cover day 5. And then verse 24 through the end of the chapter, verse 31, covers day 6. Now in day 6, you do have land animals being made there as well in verses 24 through 25. But just note, verse 26 through 31, there is something significantly different textually in here in God's creative work from, land and sea, earth and space, land animals, sea animals, birds, all these things. All of a sudden, it's as though he's trying to say, hey, in this symphony of creation, I want to make a differentiation here in the musical score and help people to see this is a unique moment. And he goes on in verse 26-31, including in verse 27, some poetic language there used, which is unique in chapter 1, and saying things that would showcase humanity as the uniquely spoken of, and the last thing made is this pinnacle, this climax of the creative work of God. The Christian humanity is placed last, not because it's last only chronologically, but it's given prominence as the crown of creation. At the end of that day, you say, it's very good. God makes humanity in his image. Can I say something really profoundly simple, really quick with that? Human rights supersede animal rights. And you may say, duh, got that. I know. But I'm telling you, people in our world today would not always claim that to be the case. Peter Singer, ethicist at Princeton, one of the most dangerous minds alive today, I think, has written publicly that animals like chimpanzees are of greater value to this world than human beings who suffer mental retardation. He said that in print. Chimpanzees have greater value than humans like that, because intelligence is what matters and theirs is higher. Therefore, they have greater value. That is not the way the Bible speaks of humanity. Do we value animal life? Sure. Proverbs say we should. Do we value plant life and steward well creation? Yes, absolutely. But make no mistake, there is a key call by God to put value on humanity as made in the image of God from conception to the end, right? From the child in the womb to my across the street neighbor who is 97 years old, literally. There is value for everyone. And the temptation, this is where worldview has traction in our lives, practically. Worldviews like secular humanism do not value infants or in utero children. They don't value humans who are 75, 80 years old and older, because what are you adding to society? This pragmatist view is saying you can't give a lot of value add to who we are, what we do, therefore you don't really matter, therefore if you're expelled from the equation, it's not that big of a deal. As Christians, we need to say every human matters. The way that God created us shows He cares for humanity. We ought to as well. Key point there. Regardless of our vocation, next point here, we should see our work as ordained by God and pursue it with vigor as unto the Lord. So, Colossians 3, verse 23, well-known verse. I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but a good reminder for us here as well. Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for man. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. That's including, guys, that's including your dream job someday, as well as your dish pit job right now at Chuck's. Whatever you do, you work heartily as for the Lord, not for man. That includes like cleaning your dorm room, all the way to, again, that dream job you have someday. You would do what you do because God is the capital B boss. He's the capital E employer. He's the one who's over all these things. You're always doing your work as unto the Lord. So whatever your vocation is, we can all go through right now and say, I'm going to do this kind of work, this kind of work, this kind of work. Whatever it is, God is calling you to do that work for Him, for His glory, for His name's sake. And yes, evangelizing at your job is glorifying to God. Doing a Bible study at your job is glorifying to God. Living with Christian character is obviously glorifying to God. And I want to say as well, just doing your job with excellence. Doing it with excellence. Every vocation here represented is a way in which we can glorify God. He made us to work in that way. Okay, we should also be good stewards of the creation God's given to us. This shouldn't be overemphasized, nor should it be neglected. We said it before here, but to say God has given us a creation to enjoy, and we should steward that well as God has given it to us. Next here, this is a key one, guys. We should not show partiality and favoritism toward a certain group of people while despising others. Let me read James 2. James 2. Verse 1. My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing comes in, if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you, sit here in a good place, and you say to the poor man, you, stand over there, or sit down at my feet, have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which is promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the Scriptures, you should love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it. Now just stop there for the time being. So clear to say, God says, don't show partiality. We are all image bearers of God. Therefore, we are called to not show favoritism. You know how easy this is to have happen? Every November, I go to a conference, different city every year, and every single year, I have to fight the temptation. And here it is. I have conversations with a variety of people. There are book publishers. There are presidents of prestigious schools, guys that are in different schools than I'm in, various people that are well-known, right? Authors, scholars, all these things. And the temptation is a conversation will begin with somebody, and my mindset can become, will this person gain me anything by conversing with them? That is wicked. That's wicked. To think of myself, man, can I gain in my social status in this group of theologians by conversing with them? I'll have talks and see, ooh, there goes so-and-so. If I talk to them, that can help my status rise. It's wicked. It's evil. And to say to us, if we show favoritism, like you can't gain me anything. They can gain me something, so I'm going to show more favor to them and less to them. That is, in God's word right there, evil. It's sinful. So we've got to be careful to recognize I want to love humanity as God's image bearers and not seek to show favoritism to those who can gain me something. Rich versus poor, right? Social status versus less. Being known versus not being known. You've got to be aware of these things and fight the tendency. So here's something I do. This is just something simple, but something I do as a habit. The last few years, I've got a chance to speak at a conference here on campus, a 9 Marks conference, with some great, well-known speakers. Jonathan Lehman, Greg Gilbert, Mark Dever. These are guys that are known, authored books, sought after, speaking at big conferences. And from my own heart, I try to do this faithfully. I really do want to be faithfulness. I want to know them, want to love them, and get to build a relationship with them. And oftentimes, these guys will bring with them interns. In the eyes of the world and what's going on in terms of what they are, can bring to the table, they're nobodies. They're not known. They're not, sought after. And I always try to make a point to talk to these interns, say, hey, who are you? What's your name? Are you married? What's your wife's name? Do you have kids? What are your kids' names? What's your background? I want to hear from them. For my own soul's sake, I need to talk to them too. Because you know what? They are an image bearer of God. Just simple ways, guys, think through, how can I show honor to all of humanity and talk to them in ways that would say, I'm not showing favoritism at any level. Then finally, because we are made in God's image, we should care greatly for life. I already referred to this, but I'll say more now. This would speak to, this is not exhaustive, by the way, but it would speak to the following issues. Issues like abortion, euthanasia, certain forms of stem cell research, cloning, domestic violence, various kinds of violence that are perpetrated, sex trafficking, human trafficking of various kinds as well. If we go over that list and hear these things, and there's no movement in our soul, I want to encourage you to pray for your heart, because those things should bother us. Those things should unnerve us. When we hear about the idea of human trafficking and know the hundreds of thousands of slaves that exist in the world that are used for the means of others in so many despicable ways, that should bring righteous anger into our hearts. That is not the way an image bearer of God ought to be treated. That is not the way a 10-year-old girl ought to be treated in Malaysia. That's not the way 14-year-old girls be treated in Shanghai or other cities in the world you think about, and in this country as well. It's not the way people should be treated. You guys know human trafficking, one of the bigger areas of human trafficking in this country is Dayton, Ohio. 70 and 75 intersect right there. It's a massive place for human trafficking. Abortion should unnerve us as we think of so many babies losing their lives by means of abortion. Euthanasia should unnerve us as we see people increasingly saying, hey, shouldn't we just kind of get rid of people that are older and they've served their time, they're kind of done. There's no value of human wisdom, it seems. Wisdom is found in those who've lived life for a long time. And we're devaluing that in so many ways. Other areas there as well. Friends, here's a close to home one. You may say, like, man, I've not encouraged or undergone an abortion. I've not encouraged euthanasia. I haven't done these things. I haven't trafficked anybody. Can I just say, Can I just say to you really quick, right now, in this present time, the easiest and the most exponentially multiplied way in which humans are trafficked is by people clicking on pornographic websites. If you say, I've never been involved in human trafficking, and you are looking at pornography, can I just tell you, every time you click and watch, you are enslaving human beings. That's how this industry works. An industry that makes more than the NBA, NFL, and Major League combined per year, by a large measure. So, hear me when I say this doctrine has really practical implications for us here in these and other ways as well, to say this matters. When a pastor, and I'll end here, sorry, but this just gets me thinking here about a lot of things. When a pastor gets on a show like The View, several years ago, I can show you the video clip if you want to see it. When a pastor gets on a show like The View and is asked about abortion and says, like, basically, well, that's between that person and God. I'm not the judge. How can I judge that? That's wrong on so many levels. There's a value of human life that God has. He values human life, and therefore we as his people ought to value human life as we're called to. So we need to speak into these things. This, for some of you, may cost you your research grants. This may cost you your job, even potentially. But we need to stand for what's right and true in these ways because we are made in God's image.